I want to talk about the Sacramento Kings at the moment. They are absolutely rolling. They're genuinely making a push for that 1 seed in the West as well, just 4 games back now from the Denver Nuggets. But I think that the time has probably come to pump the brakes a little bit on that team. They're starting to get a little bit inflated in the market, as you can see from today at Utah. We'll get to that game specifically in a little bit. But when it comes to the Kings, I mean, their offense has just been absolutely lights out, red hot. They are the number one adjusted offensive rating team in the league by some margin as well, which is super, super impressive. They're 8th in adjusted net rating this season. Also super impressive, all things considered, especially when you look at that defense, because it is what it is at that end of the floor. But they have been, I think, the beneficiary of quite a lot of things falling their way as well, in terms of scheduling opportunities, opponents not necessarily being at full strength, where they're able to catch their opponents. All of that has sort of mattered in a pretty big way for them. And I don't necessarily want to have to dampen the party, because I think that this fan base absolutely deserves all the fun that they're having this season. And I, for one, am enjoying watching that team a lot. But one thing that definitely stood out is when you look at their strength of schedule, 30th, dead last in the NBA. And like I said, I think a lot of that just comes down to the fact that they have had the opportunity to face teams when they are not 100% healthy, when they have been missing key players, when they've had sort of rest advantage working their way in certain spots as well. So all of that kind of coming to fruition, and the fact that their offense is red hot means that, you know, they have been able to take advantage of a lot of those spots. From a regression standpoint, obviously on offense, it has to come eventually. I think we're talking about, for me anyway, sort of projecting them to be about 5 points per 100 possessions worse in the near future than what they have been over sort of the last 15 to 20 games now. So a decent sample size there on the current season anyway. They are shooting the lights out. I think a lot of that regression, not just coming from beyond the arc either, because they haven't necessarily been lights out there, but their efficiency in and around the rim specifically sort of stands out. They're shooting 63% at the rim, which is very, very high, but their projected field goal percentage at the rim sits at 59%. So that 4% drop is pretty big. It's almost 4.5% to be exact. That one's very, very noticeable. And like I said, a little bit of 3-point regression as well. They're shooting 37%, expected to be around 36%. So cooling off a little bit from beyond the arc. And when you couple it with the fact that their defense is what it is, like I said, there's not exactly a whole lot of positive regression or negative regression expected for them at that end of the floor in terms of them potentially getting more stops. It means that, you know, it's going to be a tough ask for them to pull wins out when their offense isn't quite executing to the level that it has been for the large part, especially post All-Star break, but for the large part of the season as well. So I think the big thing, like I said, for me is going to be looking at trying to take them in situations where rest advantage is against them, but also teams where they are fully healthy. You know, that strength of schedule should like drop closer towards the middle of the pack. They are comfortably, you know, bottom tier in terms of absolutely being dead last in that regard. I think only the Denver Nuggets are sort of the closest ones to them, who have also been, you know, the beneficiaries of having to play teams not quite at 100% health and, you know, a lot of schedule advantage spots going their way. So that's something definitely worth keeping an eye on, I think, going forward for the Sacramento Kings to close out the regular season. They're a team that's going to play hard every single night, because I think seeding matters to them more than it does for anyone else. And, you know, you just have to listen to some of the post-game press conferences from the players and the coaches alike that sort of highlight the fact that, you know, that every game has meaning for them. So it's going to be a tough fade. It's not one that I'm going to necessarily trumpet as loud as I have previous weeks, where I think the last show that we had, you know, we spoke about fading Denver on the road, which has been very, very beneficial over the last week and a half if you've been doing that. Specifically, we've also, you know, caught, I think, a lot of the bottom of these teams in the best possible way with our homework review. So this one, I don't think necessarily going to jump out in terms of being as profitable on a night-to-night basis. But I think if we can pick the right spots in fading the Kings, then we're going to get a pretty decent return on investment there in the short term. But when it comes to the playoffs, that's going to be a fascinating story in itself, because I think we're kind of getting to the point now where the Kings might actually be undervalued in the playoffs, even if they finish as the 2 seed. Everyone's seemingly waiting for the playoffs to come around to fade this team. I think it's going to provide a lot of value on them. Because like I said, that offense, it still is what it is as well at that end of the floor. And when you can score as efficiently and effectively as they can, you negate a lot of the defensive issues that you have, and you start to put a lot of scoreboard pressure on opponents as well to match. So how much of this, I guess, transpires in the playoffs remains to be seen. But I might just be a Mike Brown and Kings believer when that time comes. Obviously, matchup dependent and what happens in terms of seedings there. But take a look at them down the track. In the short term, I guess the point is you probably want to be looking to fade them, just looking at the expected efficiency of that offense and how we're expecting some regression to the mean there at that end of the floor specifically, whereas their defense probably going to continue to leak points the way that they have been. And just trying to pull up some of their defensive metrics. And yeah, like I said, their opponents shooting 37%, projected to shoot 37%. Finishing at the rim, allowing 61%, expected to be 60%. So, not a lot of regression expected to be incoming in those 2 specific key areas there, which makes it difficult to want to back them, I think, in the short term. So starting tonight, hopefully, we'll get to tonight's card specifically in just a second. But yeah, let's see what we can do with this Sacramento Kings team in the short term. Let's pull up their schedule really quickly as well before we move on from this and have a look. I mean, they have a tough time coming up as well at the Jazz today, and then return home for a 4-game homestand. But that includes games against the Celtics, which is actually tomorrow, the Phoenix Suns, the Utah Jazz again, and then the Minnesota Timberwolves, who might be fully healthy by then as well, with Anthony Edwards potentially being back, and also the fact that they probably have Karl Anthony Towns back for that one as well. So a really tough 4-5 game stretch coming up here for the Jazz and for the Kings, and I think there is going to be pretty ample opportunity to be fading them here in the short term. So let's see what the market does with them specifically, and if we can get ahead of things there, I think there's going to be some really favorable matchups to take full advantage of.